I want to get to entropic gravity. So entropic gravity is a large umbrella, and sometimes it refers to Ted Jacobson's results, which we're not referring to here. And I would like to know the relationship between yours and Ted Jacobson. So my understanding is Ted Jacobson used Clausius's entropy along with Rindler horizons to get Einstein's equations, whereas you are using it to get Newton's equations. Does yours derive Ted Jacobson's? Does Ted Jacobson's derive yours? Is there not an intersection between them? How do you view those two different approaches?
Well, Ted Jacobson certainly was the first to realize that this idea of, we're skipping a step here, but this idea that there's some relationship between the horizon and entropy, this areas and entropy, can be used to derive the equations, the Einstein equations. Actually, it does go back to Hawking and Bekenstein. They wrote down laws that look like the laws of thermodynamics that apply to black holes. And so what Jacobson showed is that if you assume that the entanglement entropy, this kind of this quantity that we've been talking about, is equal to the area of some horizon surface, then you can derive the Einstein equations. Now, one of the things that I added to his theory, because certainly in my equations, I also like to talk about deriving the Einstein's equation, which is very important. But there's a much more fundamental step, because one of the things that I put in is that I said that Jacobson basically already assumed space-time. He assumed that there is an area. He said there is a entanglement entropy that goes like the area. Let's write down the first law, and then it becomes Einstein's equations. But I think there's something circular about the reasoning, because assuming space-time also is assuming its geometry. You cannot derive its geometry from something there. So what I realized is that, and this is sort of what I emphasized in my paper, is that the first thing that you have to get to is understanding space-time. And there's something more fundamental than just the gravitational laws. The gravitational laws are about forces that are changing just already Newton's first law. So Newton wrote down 3 laws, the first law being about inertia, the second law about the reaction is minus reaction, and the third law being the gravitational force. In a certain way, what Jacobson did, he derived the third law. Because if you derive Einstein's equations, you also derive Newton's third law. But you don't tell me how inertia arises. Inertia is a much more fundamental concept. It basically tells you what mass means. How, when we move something, why do we apply a force? Need to apply a force to accelerate it. So F equals ma. That's the law that I derived. And I think that's also still a very important thing, is that in the progress that we are making now, we're eventually not deriving only Einstein's equations. We need to derive first what space and time are. And so the fact that space and time are emergent is something that I emphasized in my paper and that he didn't see. So there's some way that my paper transcends his equations, his results. And I think it also contains it in some form. So I think the approach is different, but I think the emphasis that I made was much more on the emergence of space and time itself, and also on the fundamental laws that first need to be derived, namely the first law of Newton, the law of inertia.
Okay, so gravity emerges from thermodynamics. To me, that implies some equilibrium. But at the same time, we need gravity to drive structure formation. And that seems to me to be non-equilibrium, like manifestly so. So how do those two cohere?
Equilibrium means something in terms of the equilibrium in the particles and in everything that's filling the universe or something like that. It's kind of what we had. But if you ask what is driving the laws of gravity, it's not the particles that are doing this. It's really this microscopic building blocks of the space-time itself. And they are in equilibrium at horizons of black holes. They are at the equilibrium of the horizon of a cosmological horizon. They're not in equilibrium in some arbitrary point of space-time. And so there's some way that equilibrium can be distorted there. That's one thing. But the other thing is that the expansion of the universe and all the things that we use in our current formulation of the cosmology and structure formation are derived from Einstein's equations. So if you first want to derive Einstein's equations, then these other equations follow. But I think the more microscopic description might be quite different from what Einstein's equation already is telling us. So the assumption of equilibrium, I think, certainly goes into the laws of thermodynamics, but that only needs to apply sort of very locally in some very small neighborhood. And this is sort of also what Jacobson's argument was about. So that it's not like there's an overall equilibrium. So in a certain way, I should say the assumption of equilibrium is not what is necessary for deriving the Einstein equations or something like that. It's only anyway, I don't think there's a contradiction between those two ways of looking at it. So structure formation, I think, is something that eventually going to follow at a much later level in deriving those equations. So they're not connected to the equilibrium laws that we apply for gravitational equations.
Is entanglement entropy well defined in collapsing or non-equilibrium configurations?
Also a good question. People have so so we have a description of entanglement entropy in quite a precise one actually in theories that have been studied for now more than 25 years. Actually, it goes back to the ideas of Maldacena, which was building on ideas of Bekenstein and Hawking, Susskind, 't Hooft. But anyway, there we calculated entanglement entropy in a very precise way. This work has been extended, where we also have dynamical situations where we can define entanglement entropy. I mean, there's names associated to that. Ubani, Rangamani, Hamilton. I mean, there's some people that have defined entanglement entropy also in dynamical situations. So there's no problem there. One of the insights we are having now actually is one of the big discussions going on is that there's more than just entanglement that's going to be important in this microscopic description. So entanglement entropy can be defined in those situations, but we have other things to worry about. I mean things like computational complexity. I mean, I'm just dropping a word here, but there are many more concepts. I mean, we're going back to that word that are playing a role in this microscopic theory. I mean, it's clearly going way beyond what we can discuss in this podcast, but we are really making progress in this defining all these physical concepts in situations that are closer and closer to what we really need to describe the real world. We're not there yet. I mean, it's clear that this theory needs further development, and I think we're making lots of progress, but we're still, years and maybe even decades away from having this better understanding and having what I would call sort of the next theory, where we indeed have found a more fundamental description of what we call nature, but maybe not the most fundamental. So I don't think that we will get to this most fundamental description, but we will make progress towards a more fundamental description.
So when speaking about deriving space, in the Ryutaka Yanagi, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, the formula, it relies on a spatial region A. So does that not already encode locality, like a boundary geometry to derive the bulk geometry? So space doesn't emerge from entanglement per se, it's just the bulk emerges from boundaries plus entanglement.
You're right. We have some understanding of microscopic descriptions in space-time where we have a boundary, which is called anti-de Sitter space. It doesn't look at all like the universe that we live in. And they have, the Ryu and Takanyagi, which is kind of indeed the people that have done this initial work, they studied entanglement entropy in this microscopic description. And this microscopic theory can be thought about as living on a boundary where already is some space associated to it. And it's true that it's very useful to have already some geometry there, but the emergent geometry is the one that we have sort of in the space, which we call the bulk. It's some additional direction that we have to add. You're right that the area that we define there is not totally emergent in the sense that already has some definition on the boundary. This is one of the reasons why I think ADS CFT is not the final story of how we're going to understand space-time, because we indeed have to get rid of this idea that there is a boundary, because our universe doesn't have a boundary of that sort. But it still means that we can make progress towards it. And I think what happened in the last decade maybe is using this Ryu-Takayanagi idea and see how we can formulate it in ways where we can maybe get rid of this boundary. And so there's this dependence on the choice of this area that you're talking about. And this is where I think we need new concepts, not just maybe entanglement entropy, but also maybe this idea of complexity. But this is also where I think we are having trouble following the ideas, for instance, of Jacobson. Jacobson did assume that we can define entanglement entropy, did assume that we can identify it with the area, which is kind of what we and Takanyagi have done as well. And there are other people like, in particular, Van Ramstonk, I should mention his name, because this idea that space and time are connected because of entanglement is kind of due to Van Ramstonk. Also, Maldacena and Susskind have sort of advocated this, and they have this slogan which they call EPR is ER, which maybe you have heard about.
Yes, which I think you actually thought of a few months before. Wasn't there some email exchange in 2012 between you and Herman where you presaged this idea, but you didn't publish it? ER equals EPR?
That's correct. That is correct. We already had this idea, but I think at that time we already realized that the first idea really was due to Van Ramstonk. I think in that sense, the credit should be going fully to him. Although the slogan was, of course, invented by Susskind and Maldacena. But of course, there was earlier work by Maldacena where he also realized that when you entangle two conformal field theory, it's called that you get some connectivity and so on. So there's way that Maldacena certainly and Susskind also deserve it. But we had indeed this idea already. But that was in the context of black holes. And I think what we are learning nowadays is that we are maybe have to extend this idea of only using entanglement. So Susskind is also known for this other slogan where he says entanglement is not enough. And what he tried to add in that description is what's called computational complexity. And I do think that notion is also important. So there are many steps that we still need to go through. But what I wanted to say is that Jacobson derived the laws of Einstein, the general relativity, from assuming that the entanglement entropy goes like the area. We can derive it using sort of these ideas that when we use Einstein's equations, we can derive it kind of, but we have then sort of worked the other way. So there's some way that the logic changes. So if we assume that entanglement goes like the area, we can derive the Einstein equations. But this is an assumption. And you may wonder whether that assumption is always true. And I think that there are situations where that might not be true. And this is where I was already saying that our universe is different from the one that we have been studying all the time, namely this anti-de Sitter space. And maybe things work differently there. And I think I'm actually convinced that when we start redoing our analysis of how to derive Einstein's equations, that in a universe where there is dark energy, which is more like our own universe, that there can be deviations from it. And so I hope that our quest in understanding where the gravitational laws come from will help us understand what is dark energy and even what is dark matter. So there's a lot of things, I think, to be discovered there.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're enjoying today's episode. If you're hungry for deeper dives into physics, AI, consciousness, philosophy, along with my personal reflections, you'll find it all on my Substack. Subscribers get first access to new episodes, new posts as well, behind-the-scenes insights, and the chance to be a part of a thriving community of like-minded pilgrimers. By joining, you'll directly be supporting my work and helping keep these conversations at the cutting edge. So click the link on screen here, hit subscribe, and let's keep pushing the boundaries of knowledge together. Thank you and enjoy the show. Just so you know, if you're listening, it's CurtJaimungal.org, CurtJaimungal.org.